Well, last week wasn't a good week for the news media, was it? Trump won. The media were defeated in perhaps a mortal blow to their trust and integrity. And X, formerly Twitter, is now the news platform of choice as the mainstream media worldwide disappears. So do I need to remind you, in 5 years, general trust in the news has fallen 20 percentage points. Just 1 in 3 New Zealanders trust the news media. 60% of New Zealand survey participants said they sometimes, often or almost always avoid the news. It's the highest rates in the world. If you still trust the media, you're in a shrinking minority of New Zealanders. And the coverage of the US presidential election has not been reporting, it has been propagandising, both overseas and here in New Zealand. But despite the atrocious reporting of the media, Trump still won. Nobody is listening to the media anymore. Let me show you what I think were the worst examples from the past month. So example number 1. And this was the story about Donald Trump swaying and dancing at the end of a rally. They said it was weird and they said, let's just listen to the music. Here was One News's coverage.
Presidential rivals traded barbs in another day on the campaign trail, with Kamala Harris appearing to question Donald Trump's mental health after this. The Republican candidate ending a rally by grooving on stage for more than 30 minutes to songs like YMCA and Nothing Compares to You.
Yes, but what actually happened? Well, Trump showed some humanity by halting a political rally so that sick people could be tended to. It happened twice. And then he decided, let's turn it into a fun event of music, and he signed Trump caps. But the media mockers pounced on it and totally tried to fool you. Example number 2. One News reporter Jack Tame grossly misrepresented Donald Trump's comments about protecting women from illegal immigrants. The speech coverage is stopped mid-sentence, and Jack says Trump was referring to abortion.
They said, sir, I just think it's inappropriate for you to say. I said, well, I'm going to do it whether the women like it or not. I'm going to protect them.
After Trump's comments around reproductive rights in Wisconsin last night, Kamala Harris was quick to pounce.
Yeah, it wasn't about reproductive rights, though. It was about protecting women from illegal immigrants. Example number 3. The headlines all screamed, Trump suggests opponent Liz Cheney should face firing squad for her foreign policy stance. I mean, yeah, those are atrocious comments if he said that. Stuff said Donald Trump suggests war hawk Liz Cheney should have guns trained on her face. Except he didn't say that. He was making the point that people like Cheney are all war hawks when they're sitting in their plush Washington DC office, sending troops, 10,000 troops to fight the enemy. But how would they feel with guns trained on their face? Now, let's watch 3 News' coverage and watch when they cut the coverage.
She's a radical war hawk. Let's put her with a rifle standing there with 9 barrels shooting at her, okay? Let's see how she feels about it. You know, when the guns are trained on her face. You know, they're all war hawks when they're sitting in Washington in a nice building saying, oh, gee, let's send 10,000 troops right into the mouth of the enemy. But she's a stupid person. And I used to I'd have meetings with a lot of people.
Okay, so sorry, that was the actual coverage of what he said. Let's see whether they want to face the guns while they're making these decisions in their plush offices in Washington, DC. But let's watch 3 News' coverage and watch when they cut the coverage.
And then he suggested his old Republican nemesis Liz Cheney should be put in the line of fire.
She's a radical war hawk. Let's put her with a rifle standing there with 9 barrels shooting at her, okay? Let's see how she feels about it. You know, when the guns are trained on her face.
In recent weeks...
Ah, yeah, that was handy. So no context about what he's saying. Now, on that same night, TVNZ also butchered a piece on the abortion debate. Reporter Logan Church was keen to push the abortion narrative in the state of Georgia, which was supposed to be a real marginal seat. It wasn't. But failed to tell you that the woman who died in Georgia died from legal abortion pills, a medical abortion, and the complications arising. But the pro-abortion narrative was front and centre in our New Zealand media, wasn't it? Example number 4, TVNZ's Q&A. There was a feature on the US election and an interview entitled US Faces Chaos if Trump Wins Second Term. Now, here's the intro from Q&A.
Republican staffer for George W. Bush and staff writer at The Atlantic magazine, David Frum is a celebrated observer and analyst of national politics and global affairs. We sat down in his office and I asked him to assess the state of the race.
Yeah, the only problem is that what they didn't tell you, apart from a minor comment well into the interview, was that he's always opposed Trump. He's described as a celebrated observer by Jack, but he's founding member of the Never Trump lobby group, author of Trumpocracy, the Corruption of the American Republic, voted for Hillary in 2016 and his magazine endorsed Biden in 2020. You think that should have been disclosed by Q&A? Absolutely. I mean, feel free to interview him, but tell us his biases first. Example number 5. Poor wee 3 News newsreader Laura Tupou is absolutely dripping with unprofessionalism, sarcasm and condescension as she slams Trump for his rhetoric, but then congratulates Kamala for returning as good as she got.
No mai haere mai ma loilele. Welcome to 3 News. Donald Trump's rhetoric ramped up another notch today, if that were possible. He described his Democratic opponent, Kamala Harris, as a weak and foolish woman and said voters should not put her in the White House because she will, and I will quote, get overwhelmed, melt down, and millions of people will die, perhaps. At least he added the perhaps. And for her part, Kamala Harris gave as good as she got. Leighton Hakel reports.
Ah, lovely. Another example, 6. Are we up to 6? The New Zealand media in the week leading up to the election got very excited. A rogue poll was released suggesting that Trump might lose a safe seat. The proclamations were loud. Harris beating Trump. Harris ahead. Next minute, 56% to Trump, 42% to Harris. Not even close, team. Nobody thought to check whether this was a complete outlier to every other poll saying the opposite. The media were just too excited because they loved the narrative. And so News Talk ZB, Radio New Zealand, stuff were all over it. Now, anybody that was half watching could tell that 99% of the legacy media was campaigning for Kamala, including here in New Zealand. Now, we don't have the analysis of the New Zealand media yet, but in the US, it is shocking. During July-August, 84% positive stories about Harris, 89% negative about Trump. By the end of the campaign, just looking at the positive coverage, 78% was positive coverage to Harris, 15% positive to Trump. And look, Democrats should be hanging their heads in shame. They've had the media on their side right back to 1992. And they still haven't always been able to win. But you can see the left-wing bias has been getting worse as time progresses. Now, I'm sure you're not surprised by those stats. We had the same problem here during the cannabis debate, abortion, conversion therapy, and the parliamentary protest against mandates. The New Zealand media were biased, and many media outlets atrociously so. But last Thursday morning, after Trump was confirmed, the mainstream media weren't ready to blame themselves. Let's have a look at a few examples in the US. And the blame was all on intersectionality, and that US voters were either racists or misogynists or both. And even black and Latino voters were racist. Have a listen.
I'm not sold on this idea that, it was the cost of eggs. I worry that it was, I'm not voting for this woman, or I'm not voting for this black woman.
Oh, no, that's not what we see in our data.
Said, in fact, not only did the bro strategy work, and the bro strategy largely worked along the lines of white men, but that the bro strategy also had some impact in terms of Latino and black men.
But that message obviously was not enough to get enough white women to vote for Vice President Harris, a fellow woman. This will be the second opportunity that white women in this country have to change the way that they interact with the patriarchy. And
I'm worried about mass deportation and internment camps. I'm surprised at the result, but I'm not surprised. As a woman of color, I was so hopeful that a mixed race woman married to a Jewish guy could be elected president of this country. And I think that it had nothing to do with policy. I think this was a referendum of cultural resentment in this country.
And I just say really quickly, too, Democrats need to be mature, and they need to be honest. And they need to say, yes, there's misogyny. But it's not just misogyny from white men. It's misogyny from Hispanic men. Right. It's misogyny from black men, things we've all been talking about, who do not want a woman leading them. Might be race issues with Hispanics. They don't want a black woman as president of the United States.
I think this is a big, huge part of the story that it's hard to even digest fully at this moment. But you have Elon Musk, who owns Twitter, X, whatever we're calling it these days, X, who is a disinformation propagandist.
I think we need to start saying out loud that, what is different between Joe Biden and Kamala Harris. Everybody thinks they're exactly the same on policies, but one is a woman of color and the other is a white man that everybody was really comfortable with.
If she were a 6'4" white man from Arkansas or from Florida, and she ran a good middle-of-the-road campaign talking about reaching out, do you think she would be losing by that much? If she could chew tobacco and carry a shotgun and talk about...
The critical theory, the intersectionality excuses are just full on. Here's a New York Times columnist saying it was just whites who voted for Trump. Don't tell all the blacks and Latinos that did also.
As Donald Trump has proven, what he has proven and the way he has won has proven is that every voter has an identity. Every voter has an identity, and he tapped into one of the most powerful of American identities. He tapped into white identity. Right?
No.
And he said, you don't need to be ashamed of this identity. I'm going to give it a name, and I'm going to make you feel good about it, and you don't have to sacrifice a thing. Donald Trump played identity politics like a fiddle.
Whoa. Here's an MSNBC presenter who, shock horror, she had to delete her Twitter account.
This sort of insatiable interest in every bit of wisdom you can impart. And as a journalist, I hear you about girding ourselves for this moment. As a human, I deleted Twitter today as an act of self-preservation, and because I was
self-preservation. Here's the editorial board. This is a bit of a disturbing one. This is the editorial board of the New York Times sharing what they call the worst version of a Trump administration. This is the editorial board of the New York Times.
The worst version of a Donald Trump administration is very, very bad. One that is not only extremist, but also effective in that extremism.
Emboldened by a series of Supreme Court rulings, perhaps bolstered by support in both houses of Congress, Trump will fulfill his promise to be a dictator on day one.
He sends troops into neighborhoods like my own to try to round up undocumented immigrants, that he sets up a network of camps.
Mass deportations. It would likely plunge the United States into something like a recession. His tariffs, likewise, promise to spike prices for most Americans and cause costs to go up dramatically.
That version of Trump could result in abandoning Ukraine to advancing Russian armies, could result in extraordinarily erratic foreign policy in the Middle East.
I mean, Donald Trump often talked about things like bombing Mexico to deal with drug cartels. People stopped him from doing that.
But there's not going to be any adults in the room this time.
The worst version of it. Oh my gosh, there's some serious Trump derangement syndrome there, but that's the editorial board of the New York Times. I can guarantee you that if Kamala had won, there would never have been the worst version of a Harris administration. Can guarantee that. Here's a CBS newsreader who was in tears about the result.
How would you explain that to a 14-year-old today? How would you explain this election?
I'll try not to think about my boys, because
yes.
Yeah, shocking. Here was an NBC host who was also in tears.
Now betting on to change all of it is Donald Trump, a man who did two almost impossible things. He won the American presidency twice, and he drove a casino into the ground. What will the future hold now that
Here's Van Jones, a guy called Van Jones from CNN, who thought that if Kamala had won, Democrats would finally be able to breathe.
Once again, they're facing rejection, and that hurts. They thought tomorrow morning they're going to walk out with their shoulders back a little bit, maybe able to breathe for the first time and feel like they belong someplace. They did everything that they knew how to do, and it's going to be harder than it should be tomorrow for them to hold their heads up. And they're not the only people who are hurting tonight. If you're a parent of a trans kid, your child's face was used as a springboard to power for somebody. That doesn't feel...
No, if you're a parent of a trans kid, the trans child is going to receive the treatment they need, counselling, rather than physical mutilation. One more. I know you're enjoying this. Here's MSNBC saying that Kamala did a flawless campaign with so many celebrity endorsements. Oh, those Hollywood endorsements and those singer endorsements. But she still lost.
And I think it's important to say that, you know, anyone who has experienced or been in the United States for any period of time and experienced this country's history and knows it cannot have believed that it would be easy to elect a woman president, let alone a woman of color. Let's just be clear. And nothing that was true yesterday about how flawlessly this campaign was run is not true now. I mean, this really was an historic, flawlessly run campaign. She had Queen Latifah never endorses anyone. She came out and endorsed. You know, I mean, she had every prominent celebrity voice. She had the Taylor Swift. She had the Swifties. She had the Beehive. Like, you could not have run a better campaign in that short period.
You couldn't have run a better campaign to lose. Now, look, you may be saying, what's the international media got to do with New Zealand? For example, what's the New York Times got to do with New Zealand? Well, I'm glad you asked, because the New Zealand Herald regularly reprints New York Times articles. Here's a Google I did, and look, there's a heap of them. In fact, here's a reprint just after the election. The New York Times editorial board, this is in the Herald, America makes a perilous choice. And Radio New Zealand regularly uses left-wing media, CNN and Reuters. Stuff uses ITV and Associated Press, which are both very left-wing outlets. So yes, we need to understand the international media directly affects us. And unfortunately, we don't have a counterbalancing Fox News or the Australian newspaper or the UK's Daily Telegraph. So what was the response here in New Zealand to Trump's victory? Well, the New Zealand Herald on the night, not a great night for New Zealand. In fact, the New Zealand Herald found one American in Auckland who felt ashamed. The next day, we were told that America was entering its most dangerous period since 1861, even though the writer, Matthew Hooton, wasn't born until a century after that date. Stuff just wanted defiance from Kamala that people were Googling moving to New Zealand and warning people to find out about Project 2025. Now, I've actually already told you about how good that is, even though Trump is not connected to it. And the next day, we had this coverage about Handmaid's Tale and other fictional dystopias. Don't know if you read The Guardian, you shouldn't, but the rabid left-wing Guardian was offering therapy to staff after the devastating Trump win. And then this was over the weekend, the front page of the New Zealand Herald. Era of uncertainty, and will he be a lame duck president? Oh, don't tell the New Zealand Herald that the Republicans also have the Senate and likely the House. And there are majority Conservatives on the Supreme Court, eh? Nope, apparently he's going to be a lame duck. Now, here was 3 News' coverage the following night of Trump's victory.
Plenty of fireworks there today as Trump has blazed his way to an early lead. Andrea Vance reports from the US. One
thing I meant to tell you is just watch this coverage, remembering who actually won. And watch what the coverage is of the two parties. It's quite funny.
Two complete opposites in their politics, how they campaign and how they throw a viewing party to mark the end of polling day. Donald Trump with this muted affair at Mar-a-Lago in Florida. Supporters donning Trump's signature red hats. Trump himself reported to be watching nearby with his closest friends and family, and Elon Musk. Meanwhile, in Washington, D.C., a very different vibe.
Party
Kamala
on!
Harris holding a watch party at Howard University, where she once studied, with performances on stage and an energized audience.
Now, don't tell 3 News that actually that party was wrapped up early. And then the following night, which also needs some fact-checking.
Part of Trump's success came from boosting his support among particular demographic groups that traditionally lent Democrat. Take, for example, the Latin vote. Now, despite his anti-immigrant rhetoric...
Fact-check. It's not anti-immigrant. It's anti-illegal immigrant. Get it right.
Trump's support amongst Hispanic voters went up since the last election. Now, you can see there in the red columns, it went up from 35% to 42%. He also increased his support among black voters, while the vast majority still backed Kamala Harris, which you can see there, huge numbers in the blue column. Trump's share of the vote doubled to 16%, which in a state like Georgia, where a third of the voters are African American, may have been crucial. There was a big change among young voters as well. 36% of 18 to 29-year-olds backed Trump in 2020. That grew to 46% this time around, and that's primarily thanks to young males who flocked to Trump in large numbers. And despite all the talk about the gender divide this election, Trump's support among white women actually increased by 1% to 53%.
Oh, maybe that whole abortion messaging just didn't work. Interestingly, the US mainstream viewership of the election was right down, especially on left-wing CNN. Fox was the winner in terms of the viewers. According to Nielsen, which monitors the viewership, Fox had almost 10 million viewers, although that was down from 13.7 at the last election. But CNN had just 4.7 million viewers, basically half of who watched 4 years earlier. So that shows that the viewership has really gone down. However, there was one platform that was celebrating: Elon Musk's X, which is formerly Twitter. And he posted that there was record usage of the platform on election night. That's that red line right up the top there. And he also posted this. He said, "The reality of this election was plain to see on X. While most legacy media lied relentlessly to the public, you are the media now. Please post your thoughts and observations on X. Correct others when wrong, and we will have at least one place in the world where you can come to find the truth." Now, Musk had also previously said that leaders should post on X directly, not hand the role to intermediaries. That is what works best. He said mistakes will be made, but that's what proves it's real. People want authenticity. Yep, X is now the media outlet of choice. In fact, it's my choice. It's my first port of call. Most of the left-wing media outlets are on there, except for Chicken Stuff and Radio New Zealand, who have thrown their toys and won't post there anymore. But that's no loss. But as Musk rightly says, on Twitter, X as it's called now, you can comment, you can push back, disagree, agree in real time. There's also fact checks ongoing called community notes happening in real time so that you can see where there's questionable statements being made or questionable graphs being shown. It's the free speech and news platform now. And you know why? Well, it's because the left don't control it. The left hate free speech, which is why they have shut down here in New Zealand Candace Owens, Posey Parker and many others, including deregistering Family First, but not the Helen Clark Foundation. I'd encourage you to start using X if you haven't already. Make it one of your prime news sources. I'm there, and I'd love to see you there. My handle is Bob McCoskrie NZ, and Family First's is Family First NZ. Trump derangement syndrome is a mental condition in which a person has been driven effectively insane due to their dislike of Donald Trump to the point at which they will abandon all logic and reason. That sums up the entire news media. And sorry, we're going to get 4 more years of it. You have been warned. But it wasn't just Kamala and the woke, crazy, abortion-obsessed Democrats who were defeated last week. The mainstream media also suffered what I reckon was a mortal blow. See you on X.